So today, for the adults, we're going to talk about pure view. But we're going to talk about pure view in such a way, and here's what I try to do. I try to talk about pure view because it is fundamental to the path, but I try to talk about it in such a way so that it's reachable and attainable and understandable in our ordinary lives. It seems as though Western students, American students, tend to relate best to those issues that directly relate to their lives. I've discovered that for myself, and I hope that you'll find this useful in some way. In the path of Vajrayana, practicing pure view is fundamentally important. And yet pure view, the engagement of that practice and the meaning of that practice even, is so hard to really taste and hard to comprehend that we seem unable to practice pure view in any consistent way. One of the ways in which we commonly try to understand anything that's abstract, such as the concept of pure view, is to take that concept and to make it very materialistic. We can take a concept that is extremely abstract and try to develop certain very factual, very hard thoughts about that concept. And then in following those factual and hard thoughts, we lose some of the more hidden meanings of that abstract concept. And the problem becomes that we ourselves then become too crystallized, and we try to do our practice, which should be more tending toward searching out the hidden meanings and really fine-tuning, finding the fine lines, that we tend not to do that. We tend instead to find 1, 2, 3, or 4 things that are very easy to understand and stick with those. And in that way, we don't really understand. Our understanding is extremely limited, and we don't go very far with our practice. So I would like to explain that pure view as it is practiced in Vajrayana is very abstract. It is something that we must challenge ourselves on every single day. It's not something that we can easily learn and easily attain. And like a diamond, there are many different facets of pure view. And to understand 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 facets is not to see the whole diamond. And so we should consider that the accomplishment of pure view has a great element of search in there. We should continue to search out its meaning, continue to try to uncover the real blessing of pure view. So I've spent some time over the past few weeks trying to uncover the meaning of pure view, and I've given some explanation. I'd like to continue in that vein now. Now, of course, in the Vajrayana path, as in everything that the Buddha has taught, we are taught to examine the faults of cyclic existence. We are taught to discover for ourselves that cyclic existence is faulted, and we are taught to discover for ourselves that according to the Buddha's teaching, and again we do have to evaluate this for ourselves as well, that we have been and are and continue to be wandering in samsara with no real means by which to exit samsara. Now the Buddha teaches us that each of us are wandering in samsara due to our desire and due to the hatred, greed, and ignorance that we are experiencing. This wandering in samsara continues because, according to the Buddha's teaching, within samsara, within the cycle of birth and death, there are only samsaric things. Like this. If we could liken samsara with water, we would understand that everything that you would find in water is a watery thing. There is nothing that is not totally associated with water in water. Now that's a close analogy in the sense that in this way, for instance, if we were to look at a body of water and to see, let's see, fish that are naturally in water. We would see that fish are watery things. If we were even to take something like a physical object like paper and put it in water, the paper would become a watery thing. It would be changed by the water. Samsara is even much more like that than that particular analogy, in that everything that arises in samsara actually arises from the seed of samsaric things. And what that means is that all things that arise in samsara arise from cause and effect relationships. And according to the Buddha, those cause and effect relationships originate with hatred, greed, and ignorance, with desire, and with the assumption of self-nature as being inherently real. So if it is true, as the Buddha has said, that in samsara all things are interdependently arising, that they arise from cause and effect, and that they arise from desire, from hatred, greed, and ignorance, they have that certain kind of samsaric flavor or characteristic or tendency or innate characteristic, I would have to say. They have samsaric innate characteristics. If everything that arises from samsara is naturally samsaric in its character, then it follows logically that the Buddha's next teaching, the Buddha's teaching that follows that is also true, and that is that in samsara, and the Buddha teaches us that in samsara there is nothing that leads us out of samsara. Now this is the greatest delusion that sentient beings commonly fall to. In samsara there is nothing that will lead us out of samsara, yet we continue to look to samsara for the answers. In samsara there is hatred, greed, and ignorance. In samsara there is desire. In samsara there is ego clinging, and we cling to self-nature in that egocentric way. And we try to use those particular circumstances plus the things that naturally occur due to those circumstances, due to ego clinging, due to desire, due to hatred, greed, and ignorance, as being things that will bring us happiness, things that will bring us relief, things that will lead us out of samsara. We continue to fall prey to that, and we are continually disappointed, because you cannot find a way out of samsara by using samsaric components. That will not happen. And here's where pure view comes in. We are taught that, therefore, since all samsaric things cannot lead us out of samsara, and we have evaluated that samsara is faulted, then we should take refuge in those things which are not samsaric, which are not born of samsaric cause and effect relationships, but instead are born of something other than that. Now, other than that would imply, if you were looking at something that was not the result of samsara, you would have to be looking at, and here's the only other alternative, you would have to be looking at something that is the result of enlightenment. Because the only other condition other than samsara would be awakening or enlightenment. Samsara is the delusion, and other than samsara comes the condition that the Buddha actually finds himself to be in. Those who have achieved enlightenment, and that condition is the awakening or the enlightenment, the being outside of samsara, or spontaneously abiding in the condition of the primordial natural state, the primordial state of awakening. And that is the state that the Buddha finds himself in, or the Buddha as actually abides in. So if we are not to take refuge in those things that are samsaric, if instead we are to take refuge in those things that will lead us out of samsara, or the cycle of death and rebirth and suffering, then we must look to those things that are not samsaric. And of course, those things must arise from the mind of enlightenment. They must arise from the mind of enlightenment. So we should look to, according to the Buddhist teachings, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The Buddha, because the Buddha appears in the world and is the very expression of the mind of enlightenment. And of course, we always think of the historical Buddha, but we are also taught that there have been those who have achieved enlightenment, and that the historical Buddha is not the only to ever have attained Buddhahood. But for our purposes, we will think of the historical Buddha. We should also think of the Dharma. And the Dharma is actually the method or the path that the Buddha has brought to the world. And the reason why we should think of the Dharma as being non-samsaric is because it actually arises from the mind of enlightenment. And if the Dharma arises from the mind of enlightenment, or arises from the Buddha's awareness, which it has, then we can consider that the Dharma is not samsaric. And then we think of the Sangha, and for those of you that don't know, the Sangha is actually the spiritual community. The spiritual community that practices Dharma specifically, according to the Buddhist teaching. Now, the Sangha could not have arisen if it were not for the Buddha's teaching and blessing, and if it were not for the provision of the Dharma in the world. And so the Sangha is also the result of the mind of enlightenment. Therefore, these three things are considered to be our objects of refuge, that finding fault in samsara and not wishing to continue in the cycle of death and rebirth, we can then turn safely toward the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha as being that which is the object of refuge, which we can find help in. The Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are the only things which do not actually arise from the conditions of samsara, but actually do arise from the very mind of enlightenment. And that, of course, is the Buddha nature. Now, in the Vajrayana path, particularly, one also takes refuge in the Lama, or the Guru. The reason why one takes refuge as in the Lama or the Guru is not because it isn't, with the idea of trying to adapt a certain personality as being superior or something that you like better than other things. When you choose a guru, when you choose a lama, when you come to meet your teacher and actually take teachings, you should never do so for samsaric reasons like that. You should not choose a teacher because you particularly like them, or because you like the way they look or the way they dress, or don't like the way they look or the way they dress, or because you like the way they act or do not like the way they act. But you should choose your teachers on the basis of their qualification. And that's really important. And I've taught this before, and I'll say this again, because again, this thought is important in this teaching as well. When Gyaltsen Rinpoche was here, he outlined for us very clearly on what basis we should choose our teachers. And he gave us two main thoughts in that regard. The one basis on which we should choose our teacher is if we find someone that is academically schooled to be able to convey to you the Buddhist teachings precisely as they were taught in a very academic way. That is to say that they can read the books such as those books that you see there that are unlike the Western books that we have. You see those books that are like long tubes kind of and wrapped with cloth and have little tabs sticking off the side. Those are actually Dharma books, and they are the teachings of the Buddha directly. And there are many qualified teachers who can read those books in Tibetan and can translate them into thoughts that Westerners can understand, and that yet they can very clearly stay right with the teaching and not deviate at all. And so that is one excellent basis for choosing a teacher, that they are academically qualified. With such a teacher, you should also be certain that that teacher has accomplished the teaching. That is to say that they themselves must have done the practices. They must have received all of the necessary teachings and empowerments and lung transmissions, and themselves have taken the teachings and actually practiced them and used them within their own lives. That is one basis for choosing a teacher. Another basis for choosing a teacher is to take into account that throughout time, due to the Buddha's blessing, there are those sentient beings who have themselves practiced very hard, just as you are beginning to practice now, but have practiced very hard for many consecutive lifetimes and have attained through that practice the ability to accomplish the mind of the bodhisattva, that is the mind of the awakening being. They aren't themselves yet Buddhas in the sense that we think of the historical Buddha, yet they are truly realized, and they are bodhisattvas. And these bodhisattvas actually, having accomplished their practice, then consciously reincarnate into the world in order to benefit sentient beings. And they can take many forms. Some bodhisattvas are recognized and some are not. Those bodhisattvas that are not recognized actually work in the world under varying different conditions and can take many forms. But they are not meant to teach, they are meant to do benefit. For those of us that have had the good fortune to meet with a qualified bodhisattva and have accepted that bodhisattva as our teacher, those bodhisattvas must have met this condition according to the Vajrayana tradition. In Tibet and in the Vajrayana tradition in general, there is a system, we have a system by which those who reincarnate solely in order to benefit sentient beings, some of those have the capacity, and as lineage holders and as throne holders in the different traditions have the responsibility to recognize others who have benefited sentient beings. And they do so. In the case of my own root guru, Peno Rinpoche, his obligation, his responsibility is to recognize those in his lineage who have returned and are qualified to teach in order to benefit sentient beings. It's not only his ability to do so, it is his responsibility to do so. He must do that in order to fulfill his obligations. And it's like that in the different traditions. The certain lamas are qualified, and it is their responsibility to recognize other appearances in the world who are bodhisattvas and who have come to benefit sentient beings. The only other condition under which you should accept a teacher, other than a teacher who is academically qualified to practice Dharma, is that you may also choose a teacher who has been formally recognized in that way by a lama or a guru who themselves was formally recognized in that way. And that tradition and lineage would have to be traced back some time, actually until the time of Guru Rinpoche or Padmasambhava, where he himself predicted the chain and lineage of lamas who would appear in the world. Under those conditions, you may also choose such a bodhisattva based on their wisdom, in that bodhisattva will be able to teach the basic tenets of Mahayana Buddhism, of Dharma, and will be able to do so in a way that communicates to whomever they are appearing with. And it is very likely that that bodhisattva will take on the appearance of those with whom they are appearing, and will take on the kind of speech and kind of mannerisms of those with whom they are appearing, and will do so for their sake. That is the other condition under which you may choose a guru. Once you have chosen a teacher, and once you have taken refuge in that guru, and have taken refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, you should consider that that guru is a representative of the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha as it appears in the world. In that without the teachers, it would be very difficult for us to connect with the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The historical Buddha does not appear to be with us at this time. The Dharma books themselves are not attainable to us. And particularly as Westerners, culturally, it is very difficult for us to be able to really taste and really absorb and really internalize Dharma teaching in the condition that we're in, and that is the karma of the situation. So we find that the Lama becomes then indispensable. And that is the reason that we should work very hard on accomplishing pure view. Essential is the accomplishment of pure view concerning the Lama. Essential is the accomplishment of pure view concerning the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha. And it is based on the very thoughts that I've just given you. It should never be based on worldly concerns or samsaric things. Many times students have conflict with their teachers or do not allow themselves to take on a relationship with a teacher. They distance themselves from that opportunity. They do not give themselves the opportunity of such a thing because they themselves have a great deal of pride, and pride is a samsaric thing. They think that they know better. They think that they have the teaching much more secure in their minds in some way than the teacher might have. They feel that they themselves are much better versed. Or they may feel that they just generally know better in some spiritual way. And that pride, that kind of feeling, is actually a samsaric feeling. Sometimes students will not avail themselves of the opportunity to practice Dharma because they feel a cornucopia, an infinite amount of different kinds of samsaric feelings and judgments. And due to those samsaric feelings and judgments, they actually break with the path and are not able to follow the instructions of a qualified teacher. Our job in accomplishing view is to turn away from such samsaric impulses, such as pride, such as anger, such as grasping. And oftentimes we do feel grasping. We ourselves wish to be the center of attention. We ourselves wish to be in charge. We ourselves wish to be the teacher. We ourselves wish to be the knowledgeable one. And due to that grasping, we do not allow ourselves to, in a humble way, accomplish the view of turning to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha and clearly turning to the teacher as our guide. And so that is an indication of how we would not be able to turn to the proper path and the proper teacher due to our inappropriate view. What is the building block of such view? What is the underlying fundamental thought of such view? Once again, as I've described, it is the same as with all elements of practice in Dharma. In order to be successful at that practice, you must first discover for yourself that cyclic existence is faulted. The only way that one can discover that for oneself is to examine cyclic existence very clearly. And sometimes that examination is painful. In fact, it often is very painful. And we have a difficult time with that. We do not wish to examine cyclic existence. But we must. And we must do it for ourselves. We can't simply listen to another. We must examine cyclic existence for ourselves. Has anything that has begun with birth ever resulted in anything other than death that you know of? No. Everything that begins with birth must result in death. And that is one of the conditions of cyclic death and rebirth. That it is cyclic and that it is death and rebirth. That is samsara. Is there any happiness in samsara, in the cycle of death and rebirth, that is permanent? No, there is no happiness in the cycle of death and rebirth that has ever been permanent. Now, we have had happiness, haven't we? We've had temporary joys, and we've had moments of real elation. We've had wonderful moments that have made us think, and sometimes we think this, don't we? We look at samsara and we think, this isn't so bad. You know, you might be maybe having a new car or having a new marriage or something like that, and you think, well, this is not so bad. But these are always temporary. And in fact, we have found that even let's say that we are happy because we own a new object. That object will not last forever. How many of you have had a car that has lasted forever? Do you still have your first car? Any of you that are over 35? No, of course you don't. No one does. But we know that that object is not going to last forever. Well, even if the object did last forever, which of course it did not, has any object ever made you happy permanently? Anything? A diamond ring? Car? House? Of course not. It's not possible. It's not in the nature of samsara for any object to bring about permanent happiness, because there is no permanent happiness in samsara. So everything is in samsara is impermanent, and that is one of the faults of cyclic existence. Now, do we act like people that really understand that? No, absolutely. We do not act like people that really understand that. We continue to insist on finding happiness in impermanent things. And of course, we find that our entire continuum of mental and emotional experience is an up and down, changeable, uncontrollable soup of different kinds of experiences. And that samsara can be very deluding, because often we spend our entire lives, and you must agree with this, I'm sure, creating this search. We search and search and search for that thing that is going to make us happy. What's it going to be? Is it going to be some object? Is it going to be wealth? Is it going to be fame? Is it going to be personal power? What's the thing that's really going to do it for you? Track for yourself how much of your day, how much of your life is spent in pursuit of that thing that will bring you relief from suffering, that thing that will bring you permanent happiness. We do not act like people that actually understand that everything in samsara is impermanent, and that you cannot attain permanent happiness with samsaric things. We seem to not be able to understand that. And so that's another fault of cyclic existence, is that it has a very narcotic quality about it. We act like people that are on drugs. Literally. We act like people who are drugged and unable and dreaming, drunk with this hope and fear, continually running from these things that are fearful and abhorrent and painful, continually running toward those things that we are hopeful about. And we spend our lives very much like hamsters on a cage, on those little, you know, ever seen hamsters that run around on those little things that they exercise on, those little exercise wheels? We very, very much imitate that kind of activity, thinking that there's going to be some solution in that way. And our minds are wild with it, wild and inflamed with that kind of hope and fear, just inflamed with this fever to get, or grasp, or have something in samsara which will bring about happiness. We do not take refuge, honestly and truly, in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, because we have no understanding to do that. We seem to be too drunk. We do not really understand. And so we are not able to accomplish the main fundamental thought, which is to examine the faults of cyclic existence, and having found them faulted, then honestly and truly and purely take refuge. But this is something that we must continually work on. This is something that we must do. And that is to examine the faults of cyclic existence and honestly take refuge. It may be a painful process, but should we not take that process in hand, we find that at the end of our lives, we consistently look at our experience and see that we have basically spent all of our lives only in the pursuit of samsaric happiness, which has eluded us. And we have not built very carefully on those things which bring about permanent happiness. Those things that bring about permanent happiness are not samsaric. Now, the Buddha did describe to us, and after all the bad news that we hear, this is the good news. The Buddha did describe to us that there is a condition beyond suffering, and that condition beyond suffering is called enlightenment. That all suffering is due to desire, due to grasping, and that there is a condition beyond that. That condition beyond suffering is not a samsaric condition, and it cannot be found with samsaric things or using samsaric methods. That condition beyond suffering arises from the very mind of enlightenment, arises from the Buddha mind, the Buddha nature. It is the very fruit of the seed of the Buddha mind, because it is the actual primordial wisdom state. It is the precious awakening, and it can be only accomplished through the path of Dharma, the activity of practice that arises from the mind, from the glorious compassion and intention of those who have achieved enlightenment. So we can actually accomplish Dharma in order to arrive at the condition beyond suffering. That is the basis of any view that we hold. We should never try to hold view about the path for samsaric reasons. For instance, if we come into Dharma, for instance, if we come into this temple and we think, gee, I really like it here. Things look really exotic, and I really like exotic things. I'm a pretty hip person, you know. I'm stylish myself, and being a stylish person, I like to look for things that are very unique and hip and kind of in the front-running, cutting-edge kinds of things. Therefore, I think I'm going to gravitate towards Tibetan Buddhism. Now, this may sound crazy, but people think like that. I've actually had people come and try to become part of the temple because they think it's cool. You know, they think it's exotic. We have neat things hanging from the ceilings, and they like our sense of art, and it's pretty cool to do prostrations. It's just a neat thing to do. And of course, that's a samsaric reason for approaching the path. If it gets you through the doors, then fine, but you must work on it immediately. The only reason to actually approach the path and to stick with the path are the reasons that I have just described to you, and that is that you have accomplished the fundamental understanding of really seeing that cyclic existence is faulted and that there is no permanent happiness to be had here. And that having examined that, you begin to pursue those objects of refuge which can bring to you the result of a state beyond suffering. And those things, again, are the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and the Lama as representative of those three. Having chosen your guru, having met with your guru, having met with the path, having met with the Buddha's teachings, having met with the spiritual condition or the Sangha, the spiritual community, then you should take refuge in these things and do so for the purpose of accomplishing realization. Now, in accomplishing view, motivation, intention, impulse is everything. Is everything. If you try to accomplish view in an impure way, using samsaric things, such as, let's say you were thinking like this. Let's say that you had come to the temple and you had accepted your teacher and you had begun to try to practice Dharma teaching, and someone clued you in on the fact that what good Buddhists do is they try to accomplish pure view. So based on that clue, you think, well, what I'd really like to do now is to be a very high spiritual being. Of course, that's a samsaric thought, isn't it? It's a prideful thought. So you think to yourself, well, I'd like to be a very high spiritual being, and wishing to be a very high spiritual being so that I can be a real hotshot here in this world, and maybe someday I too will get to sit on a throne. If you don't want to sit on a throne. It's not even a comfortable seat. You're fine where you are. So anyway, if we decide that we really want to do all these things, and we really want to be elevated and be very auspiciously inclined, then in that way, I'm going to practice pure view, and I'm going to learn how to practice it, and I'm going to repeat it every day, just so that I can be a really high guy. Well, that's very mixed motivation, isn't it? maybe there's some good in there, maybe there's some virtue in there. I think there might be, and that could be because on the one hand, you are at least trying to imitate something that seems pure to you. Maybe. Or maybe there's some virtue in there in that at least your goals are loftier. At least you do want to be a spiritual being rather than maybe steal cars. You know, maybe your big thing in life is to steal cars and commit murders. That wouldn't be so hot, would it? Of course not. So if you wish instead to practice and be a very advanced spiritual being, that might be more virtuous than wishing to steal cars. But it still is very mixed motivation, and it will not bring good result. Why? Because if it has the seed of mixed motivation, it will bring mixed result. You cannot get pear trees from apple seeds. It's not going to happen. And if you have mixed motivation, you will have a mixed result. That is always the case. You cannot argue with karma. It will play out exactly. And by having mixed motivation, you are creating a mixed karmic scenario. So the result will be mixed, and at some point you may actually not continue with the path, or you may lose the path, or you may be deluded on the path and not have good result. Therefore, in pure view, the first thing that must be accomplished, even before any view is actually put into play, is to gather together the purest of motivation. And that motivation must be only based on seeing the condition of sentient beings, seeing the faults of cyclic existence, seeing for yourself that not only you, but all sentient beings are wandering helplessly in samsara, and that we are all suffering due to the inability to find permanent happiness, due to the inability to accomplish anything that will bring good result. See that this is the condition of all sentient beings. It is even worse for many other sentient beings, in that many sentient beings spend their whole lives with terrible suffering. I think about what I saw when I went to India and Nepal, but particularly in India, these bullocks that from early morning until very, very late at night had to pull terribly heavy carts that were huge, unbelievable, with two big wooden wheels on them, loaded down with very, very heavy burdens, and that while they were pulling them, they would be whipped. Their masters would be sitting on the truck also and whipping them. And not only that, to heap insult to injury, their horns were painted and they had bells hanging on them and they were all decorated up and things like that. And they were kept in a very uncomfortable way, and many of them were very gaunt and skinny, and you could tell that they weren't cared for. There are some, and they are sentient beings with feelings, you see. And then I think about oysters. Oysters are killed for their meat. They are opened up and their pearls are taken out. They are injected with sand in order to make pearls, for the luxury of our ability to wear pearls. And that's a suffering that a sentient being experiences, is it not? In the different realms of cyclic existence, there are uncountable kinds of suffering. Even in the human realm, there are children that are born unwanted, unloved, beaten, abused. And there are terrible conditions, warlike conditions, poverty, hungry. You have only to visit a third world country and to see how much great suffering there is even on the human realm. So that is the foundation for a practicing pure view. We have seen the faults of cyclic existence, and we basically get ourselves to the point where we are sickened by it. There is too much suffering. Enough is enough. Having seen that for ourselves, we then turn to that which does not have the seed of samsara in it, which is pure, that which arises from the mind of enlightenment. The three precious jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and Sangha, and the Guru or teacher or Lama as representative of those three. And for that reason, and with that motivation alone, we will be successful at accomplishing pure view. We will not be successful at accomplishing pure view in order to be a good person. We are not going to be successful at accomplishing pure view in order to get the approval of our peers or of our teachers. We are not going to be successful at accomplishing pure view in order to honor ourselves in any way. Because this is mixed motivation and it will not bring about a good result. It arises from a bad seed, it will bring bad fruit. The only proper way to accomplish pure view is through the longing to be quit of that which you yourself have found to be deeply diluted and deeply poisoned and deeply seductive. That in our delusion and in our drunkenness and in our narcotic condition of confusion, we can turn to the one thing which is a sure bet, that which arises from the mind of enlightenment. And even though we ourselves can be confused with pure motivation, wishing to liberate ourselves from the suffering of cyclic existence, and wishing to liberate those that are also suffering in cyclic existence, that being our wish, for that reason, we should practice Guru devotion. We should practice taking refuge in the three precious jewels. So remember that in accomplishing pure view, it will not be accomplished without proper motivation. And the motivation or the impulse or the intention is everything here. Therefore, we should do exactly what I've recommended the little children do. Examine our anger, untangle our feelings. Don't just accept that we are angry or hostile or hurt or this or that or the other thing. Examine for ourselves what are our feelings. Examine how often our feelings change. Examine how our feelings are really basically just part of our drunken condition. And that there is an end to suffering. And that end to suffering is called enlightenment. And the good news that the Buddha was able to deliver us, which I fail to find anywhere else in the world, is that there is an end to suffering. And that end to suffering is attainable through following the method. So even in our delusion, that should be the beacon. That should be our refuge. That's the good news. So thank you very much for coming today, and I really hope that this has been helpful to you. And I really hope that it provides some kind of light and guidance. And the way you should think about it is that you yourself should provide the way by which that light can come into your heart, because the light shines, it is there. You have met with the auspicious condition of being in a place where the Dharma is taught. Now you yourself can provide the condition by which you may practice. So that is what you should do. So thank you very much, and we'll have our closing prayers now.
To